Commander Sarah Chen had survived 3 galactic wars, negotiated peace with 17 alien species, and once talked down a Krellian battlecruiser from glassing an entire colony. None of that prepared her for the 4 sets of luminous eyes currently watching her every move from beneath her kitchen table. The Vorathian cubs had been aboard her ship for exactly 6 hours, and in that time, they had managed to investigate every corner of the human vessel with the determined curiosity of creatures born to hunt. Their guardian, Ambassador Kethrax, had warned her that young Vorathians possessed insatiable curiosity during their developmental phase. Sarah was beginning to understand that insatiable curiosity was a diplomatic way of saying, "Will stick their noses into absolutely everything." She opened the refrigerator door, intending to grab the leftover pasta from yesterday's dinner. The soft hum of the cooling unit filled the kitchen. Behind her, she heard the distinctive scraping sound of claws on metal flooring. 4 small bodies emerged from under the table like shadows gaining substance. The cubs were roughly the size of earth wolves, covered in deep purple fur that shifted to midnight black at their extremities. Their eyes glowed with an inner light that marked them as predators, evolved for hunting in low-light conditions. Each cub possessed retractable claws and a double row of teeth designed for tearing through tough hides. By all accounts, they were among the most dangerous juvenile creatures in the known galaxy. They were also, Sarah noted with amusement, completely fascinated by her refrigerator. The smallest cub, whom Sarah had mentally nicknamed Squeak due to the high-pitched sounds it made when excited, pressed its nose against her leg. The cold air from the refrigerator washed over them all, carrying the scents of various human foods. To the cubs, this must have been an olfactory wonderland. "It's just a cold box for storing food," Sarah explained, knowing full well the cubs couldn't understand English. The translation devices wouldn't be fitted to them until they were older, when their skull plates stopped shifting. For now, communication happened through tone, gesture, and the universal language of patience. Squeak made a chirping sound and pawed at the refrigerator door. The cub's sibling, a slightly larger specimen with a distinctive white patch over one eye, joined in. Sarah had named this one Patch, because sometimes simplicity worked best. Patch stood on its hind legs, front paws resting on the refrigerator's lower shelf, and sniffed deeply. The other 2 cubs, identical twins as far as Sarah could tell, circled her legs in opposite directions. She'd named them Echo and Shadow, though she still couldn't reliably tell them apart. They seemed to be conducting a tactical assessment of the refrigerator, approaching from different angles as if the appliance might suddenly bolt. "You guys are supposed to be apex predators, you know," Sarah said, reaching past Patch to grab her pasta container. "Your species has been hunting in the methane forests of Vorath Prime for millennia, and here you are, acting like my refrigerator is the most interesting thing in the universe." Patch made a deep, rumbling sound that Sarah had learned meant contentment or approval. The cub's attention had fixed on the yogurt containers stacked on the middle shelf. One paw stretched upward, claws extending slightly as if calculating whether the jump was possible. "Oh, no, you don't," Sarah said firmly, gently pushing Patch back down to all 4s. "Those are off limits. Ambassador Kethrax was very clear about your dietary requirements. Human dairy products would probably make you sick." The cubs, of course, had no idea what she was saying, but her tone conveyed the message well enough. Patch huffed and sat back on its haunches, looking up at her with those enormous, glowing eyes. The expression was so similar to a scolded puppy that Sarah had to fight back a smile. This was perhaps the strangest part of her new assignment. The Vorathians were feared across 3 sectors of space. They were natural predators who had evolved from pack hunters. Their society valued strength, honor, and the hunt above all else. Their military was legendary. Their warriors trained from childhood in combat arts that made even the most hardened human marines nervous. And yet their cubs acted like any young creature might, curious and playful, testing boundaries and exploring their environment. It created a cognitive dissonance that Sarah found both challenging and oddly endearing. Squeak had moved on from investigating her leg and was now attempting to climb into the refrigerator itself. The small cub had managed to get its front paws onto the bottom shelf and was pulling itself upward with admirable determination. A jar of pickles wobbled dangerously. "Okay, clearly I'm not going to get any peace until you all get a better look," Sarah said, making a decision that probably violated several protocols. She pulled out the crisper drawers and the deli tray, setting them on the counter. Then she opened the refrigerator doors as wide as they would go. "Come on, cold cave inspection time." The cubs needed no further invitation. Squeak scrambled up and into the refrigerator, tiny claws clicking against the glass shelves. Patch followed immediately, more graceful in its movements. Echo and Shadow hung back for a moment, watching their siblings, before deciding the opportunity was too good to pass up. Within seconds, Sarah's refrigerator had become a jungle gym for 4 alien predator cubs. They sniffed at everything, their breath forming small clouds of condensation in the cold air. Squeak discovered the butter compartment and spent a solid minute examining the concept of a door within a door. Patch had claimed the top shelf, lying across it like a sphinx, surveying its domain. Echo and Shadow were conducting a thorough investigation of the vegetable crisper area. Sarah leaned against the counter, watching them with her arms crossed. This was not how she had imagined first contact with a Varathian family group would go. The diplomatic briefings had focused on protocol, on the importance of showing respect for their hunting traditions, on never showing fear or weakness in front of them. Nobody had mentioned that their cubs would be so utterly captivated by kitchen appliances. A sharp beeping sound interrupted her thoughts. The refrigerator's temperature alarm was warning her that the doors had been open too long. The cubs froze at the sound, their ears flattening against their skulls. Then, as one, they scrambled out of the refrigerator and bolted back under the kitchen table. Sarah couldn't help it. She laughed. These were the same creatures whose adult forms could rip through reinforced steel, who could track prey across kilometers of hostile terrain, whose bite force could crush bone, and they were scared of a temperature alarm. She closed the refrigerator doors and the beeping stopped. 4 pairs of glowing eyes peered out from the shadows under the table, wary but still curious. Sarah grabbed her pasta container and sat down on the floor, crossing her legs. She was wearing her comfortable off-duty clothes, not her uniform, which made sitting on the kitchen floor feel less absurd. "It's okay," she said softly. "It was just a sound. The box makes that noise when it gets too warm. It's not dangerous." Slowly, cautiously, Squeak emerged first. The smallest cub always seemed to be the bravest, or perhaps just the most foolhardy. It approached Sarah, sniffed at the pasta container in her lap, and made a disgusted sneezing sound. Apparently, tomato sauce was not appealing to Varathian senses. The other cubs followed, emboldened by Squeak's courage. Within minutes, they had formed a rough circle around her, some sitting, some lying down, all watching with those intense predator eyes. Sarah ate her pasta slowly, talking to them in a calm, steady voice about nothing in particular. She told them about Earth, about oceans and mountains and forests. She told them about dogs and cats, the domesticated predators that humans had lived alongside for thousands of years. She told them about her own childhood, growing up on Luna Colony, where wildlife meant the carefully maintained biodomes filled with earth plants and animals. The cubs listened, or at least appeared to listen. They probably understood nothing of her words, but the tone seemed to soothe them. Patch actually lay down completely, head resting on its paws. Echo and Shadow had curled up together, their tails intertwined. Squeak remained sitting, alert but relaxed. This was the scene Ambassador Kethrax found when he entered the kitchen 10 minutes later. The towering Varathian stood nearly 7 feet tall, his adult form possessing all the lethal grace that the cubs would eventually grow into. His purple and black fur was perfectly groomed, marked with the silver braiding that indicated his diplomatic status. His eyes, the same luminous quality as the cubs but far more intelligent and assessing, took in the situation immediately. "Commander Chen," he said, his voice a deep rumble that the translator rendered into English. "I see the younglings have discovered your food storage unit." Sarah looked up at him, still sitting on the floor surrounded by cubs. "They were very interested in what they called my cold cave of treasure. I hope I didn't violate any protocols by letting them investigate." Kethrax's mouth opened slightly, showing teeth. Sarah had learned that this was the Vorathian equivalent of a smile. "On the contrary, you have shown them kindness and patience. These are qualities we value highly, especially in those who will be teaching our young." "Teaching?" Sarah set down her now empty pasta container. "Ambassador, I thought I was just providing transport to the diplomatic summit. Nobody said anything about teaching." "The council has made a decision," Kethrax said, moving fully into the kitchen. His presence somehow made the space feel smaller. "These 4 cubs are to be part of a new initiative. We wish to establish stronger bonds with humanity. What better way than to have our young learn from yours? You have been selected as their primary handler during the journey to the summit and beyond." Sarah processed this information. "You want me to be their teacher, their babysitter. We prefer the term pack guide, but yes, essentially." Kethrax settled into a sitting position on the floor with surprising grace for such a large being. The cubs immediately perked up, recognizing an adult of their own species. But they didn't leave Sarah's side. "You are already forming bonds with them. Squeak follows your movements. Patch trusts your judgment. Echo and Shadow have accepted you into their tactical unit." "You know I've been calling them those names?" Sarah felt slightly embarrassed. "They're not exactly dignified. Vorathian cubs do not receive their true names until they complete their first hunt," Kethrax explained. "Until then, we often call them by simple descriptors. Squeak, Patch, Echo, and Shadow are perfectly acceptable designations. They are, in fact, rather apt." Squeak chose that moment to pad over to Kethrax and headbutt the ambassador's leg affectionately. Kethrax reached down with one large paw hand and scratched behind the cub's ears. The rumbling purr that resulted was loud enough to vibrate through the floor. "They like you," Kethrax observed, looking at Sarah. "This is not something that happens easily. Vorathian cubs are cautious around strangers, even young ones. They can sense threat, sense deception. They sense neither in you." Sarah watched the cubs, who had now divided their attention between her and Kethrax. What exactly would this role entail? "You would care for them, teach them about humanity, help them understand your customs and ways of thinking. In return, they would teach you about Vorathian culture from a perspective few outsiders ever experience. It would be a cultural exchange at the most fundamental level. And if something goes wrong, if one of them gets hurt or sick, or... I will be present for the entire journey," Kethrax assured her. "I am their primary guardian. You would be their secondary contact, their bridge to understanding human behavior. Already they have learned something valuable from you today." "What's that?" "That not all caves must be explored with caution. That sometimes curiosity can be satisfied safely. That the unknown can be investigated without immediate threat." Kethrax's eyes gleamed with something like amusement. "That refrigerators contain wonders worth discovering." Sarah laughed despite herself. "You saw that, did you?" "I have been monitoring from the doorway for several minutes. Your patience impressed me." "Many beings would have shooed them away, treated them as nuisances. You let them explore, set gentle boundaries, and made them feel safe doing so. These are the marks of a good pack guide." Patch had made its way over to Sarah again, and was now attempting to climb into her lap. The cub was really too large for this, all awkward limbs and sharp elbows, but Sarah helped it settle anyway. The weight was substantial, warm, and solid. "I'm a starship commander," Sarah said, even as she found herself stroking Patch's fur. It was softer than it looked, with an interesting texture that changed direction under her fingers. "I don't have training in xenobiology or child development or teaching." "You have something more valuable," Kethrax replied. "You have instinct. You treated them as individuals with their own personalities. You spoke to them with respect, even though they cannot understand your words. You showed them something new without overwhelming them. These are not skills that can be taught from a manual." Squeak had climbed onto Sarah's other knee. Echo and Shadow were pressed against her sides. She was effectively pinned by alien predator cubs, and somehow this felt completely natural. "The summit lasts 6 weeks," Sarah said slowly. "That's 6 weeks of being responsible for 4 Varathian cubs while also managing my ship and crew." "Your crew has already been briefed," Kethrax said. "They are aware and supportive. Many have volunteered to assist with cub care. Humans, it seems, have a natural affinity for protecting and nurturing young creatures, even those of other species." Sarah thought about her crew, thought about Lieutenant Ramirez, who had 7 younger siblings and had practically begged for a chance to play with the alien puppies. Thought about Chief Engineer Kim, who had already started designing enrichment activities for the cubs. Thought about Dr. Okafor in medical, who had spent 3 days studying Varathian juvenile health parameters, just in case. Her crew would love this. They would probably love it more than she did, though she was rapidly discovering that having a lap full of warm, purring alien cubs was not exactly a hardship. "All right," she said finally. "I'll do it, but we're setting some ground rules. No hunting in the engine room, no climbing on sensitive equipment, and absolutely no more unauthorized refrigerator raids unless I'm supervising." Kethrax's teeth showed again in that Varathian smile. "Agreed. Though I suspect that last rule will be tested frequently. The cold cave of treasure, as you call it, has made quite an impression." As if to confirm this, Squeak's attention had already drifted back to the refrigerator. The small cub's ears were perked forward, eyes locked on the appliance as if memorizing its exact location for future reference. Sarah sighed. It was going to be a very interesting 6 weeks. But as she sat there on her kitchen floor, surrounded by alien predator cubs who had decided she was trustworthy enough to sleep near, who had chosen to follow her into the kitchen and investigate the mysteries of refrigeration technology, Sarah found herself smiling. Maybe this was what diplomacy really looked like, not formal negotiations and careful protocols, but moments of connection. 4 cubs discovering that cold boxes held treasures. A human learning that feared predators started as curious younglings, simple moments of understanding that bridged the vast gulf between species. Patch yawned, displaying an impressive array of teeth, then settled more firmly into Sarah's lap. Within minutes, the cub was asleep. Echo and Shadow followed suit shortly after, their breathing sinking into a peaceful rhythm. Only Squeak remained awake, still watching the refrigerator with devoted attention. "You should rest," Kethrax said quietly, rising to his feet with fluid grace. "Tomorrow begins your official duties as pack guide. The cubs will be energetic after their sleep." "More energetic than this?" Sarah asked, eyeing the 3 sleeping cubs currently using her as furniture. "Much more," Kethrax confirmed. "This is merely their investigation phase. Tomorrow they will want to test everything they learned today. They will want to open the cold cave themselves. They will want to understand how it works. They will want to determine if all human spaces contain such wonders." Sarah groaned softly. "I'm going to need more coffee." "Coffee is the human stimulant beverage, yes? I have been told it is essential for coping with younglings of any species." Truer words were never spoken. Kethrax moved toward the door, then paused. "Commander Chen, thank you. for seeing them as individuals rather than threats, for treating their curiosity as valid rather than annoying. My people will remember this kindness. After he left, Sarah remained on the floor, trapped under sleeping cubs. She could probably extract herself without waking them. But something made her stay. Perhaps it was the rhythmic purring that all three sleeping cubs produced. Perhaps it was the warmth they radiated. Perhaps it was simply that this moment, unexpected and unplanned, felt important. Squeak finally tore its gaze away from the refrigerator and looked up at Sarah. The small cub's eyes glowed in the dimmed kitchen lighting, alien and beautiful. Then Squeak climbed carefully over its siblings and curled up against Sarah's chest, right over her heart. The message was clear. The cold cave of treasure was interesting, full of mysteries worth investigating. But the human who had shown them patience and kindness, who had let them explore safely, who had sat with them and spoken in soothing tones, she was treasure too. Sarah wrapped her arms carefully around the four cubs. These predators in training who had trailed her into the kitchen and decided that both she and her refrigerator were worth their attention. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, new moments of chaos and wonder. But tonight, in this quiet moment, she was simply a human who had earned the trust of four alien cubs, and that, she realized, was perhaps the greatest treasure of all.